Our guest speaker today is Douglas Kruger. You'll probably, as I said, you know his voice. He's a multiple award-winning speaker and an author of 12 commercially published books with 4 publishers on 3 continents, including bestsellers like Own Your Industry and Poverty Proof. He's a Hall of Fame speaker and certified speaking professional. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Douglas. He's going to be talking about a very exciting topic, anything strategic around rule breaking. So looking forward to that. This is normally about an hour talk that Douglas would give. So he's condensed it into 20 minutes. So warm welcome, Douglas.
Thank you so much, Jason, and welcome to you from all around the world, wherever you happen to be joining us. I am coming to you from the Channel Islands, the British Channel Islands. And if that sounds familiar and it vaguely rings a bell for my fellow South Africans, it's because the world's greatest rugby team happens to be here right now. The Springboks are in Jersey, and in fact, my 7-year-old son had the chance to meet them, to be hugged by them, to collect signatures just the other day. So Jersey in the Channel Islands is, in theory, the sunniest part of the British Isles, which is a little like saying the least soggy part of a wet sock. Nevertheless, it is an extraordinarily beautiful place to be. And I am Johannesburg born and bred. I spent the first 40 years of my life there. We have been in the Channel Islands for the past 3. And I'm based here now, but I write and I speak all over the world on what I think of as species level trends. Now, what is a species level trend? Well, if you have to imagine the span of human history, it's anything that has happened centuries ago, even millennia ago, that affects us today. It's who we are and it's where we're going. And I'll give you a quick example of that one. We had a global conference in Jersey yesterday, and I had delegates from all around the world. And I said, please complete the phrase for me. And I said, the rich are getting richer and as one, people from around the world said, and the poor are getting poorer. Now, folks, that's false. That is what we believe to be the trajectory, the trend of our species right now, and it's completely inaccurate. In fact, the rich are getting richer, but globally, the poor are getting richer faster than at any point ever before in all of human history. Indeed, in the last 25 years alone, I document in a book called Poverty Proof, which was published in South Africa, we've lifted over 1 billion people out of abject poverty. And that is a phenomenal species level trend. There is actually perhaps greater hope than we often appreciate. Here's another species level trend. No human system tends towards simplicity. I've come from South Africa into British culture, which is a culture that has spent the last 1,000 years accumulating rules and guidelines and bureaucracy and so forth. And in many ways, they've done it incredibly well. The problem is, the more you increase your bureaucracy, the more human freedom tends to shrink in tandem. And there are problems to having too many rules, too much bureaucracy. So whether we're talking about a company or a country, over time, these things do not tend towards simplicity. They accumulate more and more rules. And there are downsides to rules. We tend to think of the rules as the thing that keeps us safe. But if you study various cultures around the world and the culture of high-performing organizations like NASA, it is entirely possible to point out specific instances where the rules have actually gotten people killed. They've been more dangerous than human agility and human intelligence. And so I speak on the strategic how-to of clearing away rules in a safe way. Now, I also understand where and when rules work to our benefit. And the reason for that is I'm married to a woman who happened to work as a compliance manager for many years for Standard Bank. So you can imagine our home scenario. My wife works as a compliance manager, and I write books called They're Your Rules, Break Them, and it's quite a combustible combination. But both of us come at this from different perspectives, and we both come to the idea that humans have to achieve things. There are things that have to be done. In every organization, in every nation, there are things that humans must accomplish. And there is a balancing act between rules and goals. I think lately we have veered too strongly toward the world of rules, and we have lost sight of how much humans need freedom. Now, yesterday, I had delegates from Argentina in the conference that I spoke at, and I asked them just to raise their hands. And I said, you are currently involved in bucking the trend in terms of a grand human level trend. Most nations around the world are accumulating rules and bureaucracy. Argentina is engaged in an experiment by which they are actively reducing government, reducing bureaucracy, and getting rid of rules and regulations. And it was extraordinary timing because just yesterday, some of their results came out financially as well. And they are looking at a 5.6% growth rate for their economy. And the next one down in the South American nations is something like 2.6%. So it's extraordinary to see what can be done when we clear up a little space and we make room for human innovation. There was a famous study done a few years ago, and it became the basis of several best-selling books. The study asked the question, in human wars, who wins? Is it the side that has greater resources or the side that has fewer resources, the bigger army or the smaller army? And at first, the results were exactly what you would expect them to be. Over several hundred years, if you're the bigger army, you have more resources, the chances are something like 75% that you are going to win that battle. Except if you refuse to play by the accepted rules of warfare. If you break the conventions, if you go against the rules, if you do things in unexpected ways, then your chance of victory goes up from 28.5% to 63.5%. Now, for a military force, that is a switch from probably will lose to probably will win. That is an extraordinary gaining of potential just based on doing something surprising, based on refusing to play by the accepted rules of the game. So I've made it my mission to hunt out and to articulate the how-to of strategic rule breaking. The book that I wrote is called They're Your Rules, Break Them, and it has 50 ways to smash silos, bust bureaucracy, and create a high-performing culture. And whenever I get to speak on this for, say, leadership retreats or big conventions, I will pick the 5 or 6 that are most relevant for that group. And that's what I've done today. So I will share some small and some massive examples of how you can clear the space for human innovation, for accomplishment, and still keep your people safe and still take care of your brand. So let's just take a very small example of this. What is a simple version of strategic rule breaking? Well, for those of you who grew up in South Africa like I did, I believed that U-turns were illegal universally. In fact, if you are South African, I wonder if you've been to the McDonald's at the top of Rivonia Road. There's a very famous little intersection there where presumably half of the people leaving McDonald's will want to turn to the left and half will want to turn to the right. But you can't do it. There's a concrete island in the center of the road. Nevertheless, the concrete island ends a few feet to one side, and if you sneak out to the left, you can make a U-turn and go to the right. But law enforcement is well aware that people do this, and they've become cynical about it. They sit on the other side of the road, and as you do your illegal U-turn, they stop you right there, and they hand you your fine. So that was the scenario in which I grew up. I believe that U-turns were universally illegal. Then the first time I headed off to the UK, and I saw this in California as well, it blew my mind to discover that because this is a man-made rule, it can be cleared away. In California in particular, they will have signs in the middle of the road indicating that you can do a legal U-turn. They have the same concrete island up the center of the road, but it ends some 20 feet before the line, and off you go, you can do your U-turn. They've discovered that this is a useful human behavior, and therefore they have enabled it. Here's another one. Where you're sitting right now, like myself in Jersey, perhaps you're in London, maybe you're in South Africa. What's the traffic looking like? How much time did you spend in traffic this morning? Well, here's an American innovation. They allow their people to make an exception to a rule. You can do a legal right turn against a red light. And I've experienced this one in California as well. You come up to the line and the rule says you can't go if the lights are red. However, in places like California, you can check to see if anything's coming, and if it isn't, you can simply make a right turn. That clears congestion for that entire lane, which means that you have eased the burden on an entire city. So what they're doing is they've said, we have rules, we have ways of doing things, but we've also found ways to enable agility. Where the rule is not necessary, we permit the exception. And that's absolutely ingenious. Now, you can do this at a small level, or you can do it up to the level of Argentina, stripping away government bureaucracy. Elon Musk is famous for doing this, and of course, our fellow South African. One of the things he was able to achieve is he got a rocket out into space 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper than NASA was ever able to do it. And as a result of that, NASA now works with him, and they piggyback on a lot of those of the expertise. And when you start to dissect that, and you go back to the level of behaviors, there are very simple things that he does that are effectively smart rule breaking. They're just clever ways of organizing human systems. But when you scale them up to the level of rocket manufacture, you end up being able to do things 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper. And I'll share with you one of his very simple principles. He says, imagine that you're making tennis rackets. Now, let's assume that there are three basic parts to a tennis racket. You've got your frame, you've got your strings, and you have your rubberized grips. Now, what most corporate groups will tend to do is they will push those people out into separate divisions, your strings people, your grips people, and your frames people. And each group will work in isolation and then bring their work together at the end of a half year of production. And he says what we tend to do is we get everybody swirling around the problem from the word go. And that is one of the principles by which they organize things differently and become more agile. Now, I'll show you how this works in the corporate world. My wife comes home one day, and she's been working for Standard Bank for several years. She now works for the regulator on the island of Jersey, regulating financial services. And she says, today I had to break a team's heart. The sales and marketing guys had spent half a year working on an innovation, and it was their baby. They had built it from the ground up, and they were proud of this thing. It was going to take South Africa by storm. This was going to move Standard Bank ahead. And they come to her in the compliance department, and she had to shut it down stone cold. Half a year of productivity culled. And she came home and she said to me, what really broke my heart about this one is that if they'd come to me on day one, I could have given them a simple tweak and they could have had their idea. And folks, that's what Elon Musk is talking about when he says, get your people together from the start. They had the sales team and the folks who are monitoring all of this, the folks in compliance and the financial people in completely different silos. Half a year of productivity lost. We think that the rules keep us safe, but the reality is that every rule comes with an associated cost. Now, the cost might be in terms of actual money. It costs money to implement rules, and you have to have people and systems monitoring behaviors. Plus, you often have to have people monitoring the people who are monitoring the behaviors. It also costs us in terms of time. Every new rule that you introduce slows the system down. And when you start to do it en masse, when you start to do it at scale, it slows things down exponentially. There's a fascinating study that says if you want to get things done quickly, you need a team of 7 people. 7 plus or minus 2. Now, why? Because when you have fewer than 5 people, you start to lack the intellectual diversity. But when you have more than 9 people, the channels of communication become so convoluted that it slows the project down. And it's not that it slows it down incrementally. The more people you add, the more it slows it down exponentially. How big are your systems? How big is your organization? How many layers of rules and bureaucracy have you added? And is that a threat? Would it be possible for someone to out-innovate you simply because they are not dragging along the burden of rules? So rules add cost, they add a burden of time, and they cost you in terms of opportunity. Perhaps the most famous one. The folks at Google take a look at the people at Facebook, what is now called Meta. And Facebook is becoming incredibly popular. And they say, we have to do something to compete with this. So they get their engineers into a room, and they spend the next 6 months or so developing what they believe is a superior product, superior by every metric. And they bring it to the folks at Google and they say, we have something that can knock them off the landscape. And the compliance people step in and they say, that's fabulous, just give us 3 years to make it compliant. 3 years later, Facebook had a critical mass, and it didn't matter that they may have had a superior product. They had lost the opportunity. So rules can cost us in terms of forfeited opportunity, but it goes further than that. The more you burden your go-getters, your achievers, your innovators with additional rules that they have to worry about, the more you increase the attrition rate and they start to go elsewhere. So here are 3 things you can do very quickly in order to free up space and in order to innovate. Number 1, ask, which rules are people already trying to break? Observe the rule bending. Can you enable the U-turn? Is there a safe way that you can enable people to break the rules? Are your customers trying to get past your own admin systems and your own rules? Are they trying to teach you that you're putting too many barriers between them and handing their money to you? Number 2, petition the owner of the rules. Famous example of this one. There's flooding in Indonesia. An emergency team needs to get their equipment through France and go and save lives. Normally, this takes a mountain of paperwork. They ask the French government, can we go straight through? Can you scrap the rules for us? And because the French government owns these rules, they say yes, and they sweep them aside wholesale. Number 3, use ignorance as a strategy. When you have new people come into your organization, they will perceive more than you do. They will look at certain things and say, that's silly, that's slow. Can you allow them to change the default setting? They can see more than you can because we become mired in our own systems. We can't see them anymore. And very famously, bankers didn't invent PayPal. It's people on the outside. Almost every industry-changing innovation has come from the outside. Could you use ignorance as strategy by asking, what are we actually trying to achieve here? And that can be an entire day's workshop. And the final one I'll leave you with is, could you win on a different field? In other words, when they're all playing soccer, could you pick up the ball and run and invent the game of rugby instead? For my fellow South Africans, this is essentially what Adrian Gore did with Discovery. He was frustrated that he couldn't do the things he wanted to do within the existing systems, the existing organizations, so he picked up the ball and ran somewhere else and started a different organization. In short, rules accumulate over time, but rules are a choice. We can get rid of them. When we do, we free up space for innovation, for productivity, for proactivity. We are seeing the results in places like Argentina and in agile organizations that choose to do this. But it's a leadership decision. You have to do it by design. You can allow exceptions. You can ask which rules people are already trying to break. You can petition the owner of the rules to remove them wholesale. You can win on a different field. Those are just 4 thoughts to mull over. There are at least 50 more. But the idea, the germ of a thought I'd like you to mull over the next few days is, which rules are getting in your way? Are they your rules? And can you safely remove them? Thanks for your time, folks. Back to you, Jason.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Douglas. I was making loads of notes there, and I'd love to hear more about those other rules, and so many things that are just applied to what just the call I had this morning about some challenges we're having and how to not break the rules, but and find a solution. And one that comes to mind is I'm sure everyone relates to is Rassie. We all know Rassie and the water boy when he was a water boy, and what he broke the rules. That he didn't break the rules, but a rule was created to stop him being the water boy. And I think Rassie's one of those innovators. I'm sure. Yes. I wonder if he comes up in your book. Do you actually relate to Rassie at all, or is it?
Jason, I'm writing a new one right now for Penguin, okay. And it's tentatively titled Wicked Smart. And it's all the smart cuts of that kind of nature that have been used in battles, in corporate, in strategy. That's what we're after. In Jersey, South Africans are currently the highest paid demographic. And I wonder if it's not because we have something of that in us. We find a way. And that's the spirit of the thing.
Yeah, 100%. Stunning. And that aligns with us as Ubuntu, this networking session.